Thank you. Very nice to be here and meet you. And when I arrived, I heard that you were discussing the eco-anxiety and environmental education article that I did roughly 1 year ago. So it's a pleasure to hear that it's been useful. So I have prepared some observations about eco-anxiety, ecological emotions and education, and then we'll have a chance to discuss. So here's a quote from a 12-year-old child talking about climate anxiety. Adults have to tell children the truth about the climate crisis, because if you don't tell me the truth, that means you are lying to me. And if you lie to me, I won't be able to trust you. And if I can't trust you, then I can't talk with you about things that worry me. She continues. So tell children the truth, but don't tell them all the bad things all at once. Talk about a bad thing and then a good thing, then a bad thing and then a good thing. So here's some wisdom for environmental education and communication from a 12-year-old child. This is a quote from Caroline Hickman's article called "We Need to Find a Way to Talk About Eco-Anxiety." Hickman has been doing many years research about children's feelings related to the climate crisis in various countries. And I think the child is here telling something very important, which can be described by several frameworks. For example, I have used the concept of binocular vision or skill of seeing two levels in this regard, which means the ability to see also the good things that are happening in our world. That is sort of a way to confront the so-called negativity bias that we all have in our minds. Probably for evolutionary reasons, it's been important that bad things and threats and troubles stay in our minds very well. But then, of course, it's very problematic because the news feed consists mainly of bad things, and we need to hear also about the good things to increase our resilience. So with eco-anxiety, we are not talking fundamentally about an anxiety disorder. Of course, it can be very strong and problematic, but fundamentally, it's an adaptive reaction to the very real ecological crisis. Now, you are familiar with many of these main ideas if you have read my paper, but I'll just make sure to repeat them here. And it is a challenge the ways that the concept of anxiety, ångest in Swedish and Scandinavian, is used. And for many people coming especially from the health sectors, it brings into mind more of an anxiety disorder-like mental state. But also terminologically wise, anxiety in English is used to mean an emotion that evokes in our bodies when we encounter threats which include uncertainty. So it's closely related to problem solving, the need to find more information, and changing our behavior. And that's why I've been strongly arguing about the adaptive character of so-called eco-anxiety. And that's also a way to defend it against overly pathologizing or therapizing interpretations. I'll very briefly speak about this new international research article, Young People's Voices on Climate Anxiety, Government Betrayal and Moral Injury, a Global Phenomenon. You may have seen some news items related to it. I don't know now whether you have discussed this during these days. Caroline Hickman, who was already mentioned here, was the one who put this research team together. She's the lead author together with Elizabeth Marks, who is a social psychologist, and I was the third author. And then there's Susan Clayton, who has been very prominently researching climate change and psychology also, and a bunch of other people. So the preprint version is available already. The final version, which has been accepted already, will be published in the Lancet Planetary Health in December. So this article consists of online surveys and analysis of them. There's 10,000 children and young people from 10 countries, so 1,000 respondents from each of the countries: Australia, Brazil, then several countries from Europe, Finland, France, Portugal, United Kingdom, India and Philippines from the East, Nigeria from Africa, and then the USA. Of course, this is not completely globally representative. We try to select countries from various parts of the world, but also countries where there has been some discussion about related matters. And yet again, countries where there is not a total crisis going on, because then that sort of thing takes all the attention. Now the results are very serious. 3/4 of these 16 to 25-year-olds think that the future is frightening. Over half think that humanity is doomed. So this belief is, of course, a very serious sign of pessimism among young people. And of course, this doesn't go into specifics. We don't know how many of them are catastrophizing and thinking that humanity is doomed in the near future, and how many of them think about this in a longer time span. But anyways, this points out to very serious conditions. Over half, almost 60%, think that the governments of the world have betrayed them because the governments have failed to act in time in relation to the climate crisis. So there is a very strong element of moral outrage also coming out from the results of this global survey. Nearly half of these children and young people feel to have been dismissed or ignored by other people when they have tried to talk about climate change. So this is an important issue also in relation to democracy, citizenship, and the basic rights of young people also. So the results of that survey, you'll easily find more information about that online, are very, very serious. And it's of course a great relief for the researchers that the article has got so much attention now in international media and partly in politics. But of course, what is most needed is constructive action, and let's see whether that happens. Now, in this article, which you have already read, I'm exploring some of the what I see as main issues that educators could do. And of course, this is related to the very important fact that when talking about eco-anxiety or climate anxiety, it's not just anxiety, but there's a wide array of different emotions and feelings. I've written this year an article about climate feelings, and that should come out early next year. It's now in peer review, so there will be more discussion about the various feelings and emotions. There's confusion, for example, desire to do something, which is of course a very good thing. There's anxiety and fear and worry in several forms. Sadness, again, in various shades and connotations. And in different languages, there's different vocabularies for this, and that's one important thing to take into account in education. Guilt and shame, also in various forms. Anger, and this, I think, is one of the big challenges for education. And there's, of course, great feminist educational scholarship about this. Mikael Tsembulas, for example, in Sweden, Maria Ojala has been drawing from Tsembulas's research and the way that anger is sometimes complicated in educational settings, perhaps especially in relation to girls. You know, the atmosphere where it's somehow threatening if the young people show moral outrage because it's so disturbing. But if there are real ethical problems involved, then anger in the form of moral outrage and non-violent action is very much needed. So I think that various forms of anger is one affective dimension that we have to wrestle with more. Despair in many forms, but also a sense of community and feelings of belonging and togetherness, for example. Now this list could be continued. In Finnish, I've written a whole book about various feelings related to the ecological crisis. Luckily, these are getting more attention now in research, but there's still lack of many research around many of these emotions or feelings. And the term of emotional literacy that was mentioned a bit ago, you can think about it as you think about literacy in general. It's related to skills an ability to read, but also an ability to do something with what you read. So with emotional skills, including emotional literacy, one is better able to recognize emotions and name them, which then enables one to discuss them together with others. And also various forms of self-care are much easier if you roughly recognize what you are feeling. For example, if you realize that underneath a vague anxiety and restlessness, you are feeling much sadness because of the losses and damages happening in the world, then you can do something which is related to sadness and grief, setting time aside for feeling sad, doing symbolic action, which helps with feelings of sadness and so on. So there's a very practical side also related to these emotional skills and emotional literacy. There would be a lot to discuss in relation to this. About some practical needs, there's of course the need for the educator to encounter his or her own emotions, and this based on our experiences in Finland. We have an educational project called Hope and Action, Toivoa ja Toimintaa. Based on our experiences, this can be tricky because not too many educators have received much education in emotional skills. And the subject matter can feel very challenging, so people sort of intuitively often want to keep a distance at opening up exploration of the affective dimensions of the ecological crisis. So this really requires leadership in the school system, for example, from the principals, and then there's the problem of how to motivate the principals to do it when speaking about schools, for example. So there are movements which advance this, but much more work is needed. Feeling, naming, working through are some of the concepts which can be evoked here. And the question, what could be done to facilitate this? And I've been told that there's many people working with teacher education in this session, and of course that's a really good way to build a better future by enabling future teachers and educators with educational skills. Then there's the need to evaluate critically cultural attitudes and norms related to emotions and eco-emotions. For example, gendered emotion norms like men shouldn't cry in public are still pretty strong in many industrialized societies. And that, of course, complicates, for example, ecological sadness greatly. If we have a general atmosphere that boys shouldn't ever cry, then we sort of send them culturally into complications around ecological grief. There is a great lack in general of emotional skills or emotional literacy in industrialized countries. The concept of alexithymia, which means that there is no words for feelings, alexithymia. If that is taken as a diagnosis, it means an inability to name and recognize emotions. It can be used a bit more metaphorically in relation to cultures, but I do think that this is a real issue in industrialized countries, and then there's a profound need to think about why is it so and what could be done to make the situation better. Now I have one more slide which has these 3 steps, which I also discuss in my article, but because you have read it and time is running, I'll skip that now. You can have the slides later if you wish. I just mentioned that there's an interesting international network called Existential Toolkit for Climate Justice Educators. So www.existentialtoolkit.com. So there's interesting essays about justice issues and lots of activities for emotion work in education as related to the climate crisis. So that's recommended, and some of my own practical materials are also found from that website. You can follow me on Twitter if you so wish. I have some practical stuff in English also in my blog, Eco, Anxiety and Hope, and I'm very much looking forward for the discussion and this brief time that we have together, but nice that we have it. thanks for listening so far.
Thank you. I'm sure we have questions arisen. As many of us in the project group works with quite young children, so my first question concerns this scenario, and if you in your class have at least one pupil that shows obvious signs of climate anxiety, what would your advice be to the class teacher? How to handle the situation?
A very, very good question. And one can think of a situation where a child shows other kinds of anxiety or distress. And what's the guidelines for teachers if they notice these kinds of issues in the classroom? So there's definitely a need to discuss with the child personally in private. There may be a need to consult the parents if that's possible, and to think about the resources which might be available. If there's a school psychologist who might help, if there are materials produced by, for example, social and health professionals which might help. In Finland, we have a national project in the social and health sectors about eco-anxiety. So we have a website, www.ympäristöahdistus.fi, which has materials also for these kinds of purposes. But the situation is not similar in all countries. And of course, it's important that there is general validation about the very understandability of climate anxiety in the class sometimes. So not to pinpoint the child who is expressing this, but generally to build an atmosphere and culture where these kinds of phenomena are understood. So that also supports then the children who feel it most strongly. Maria Ojala, psychologist and environmental education researcher, has been drawing a lot from this coping framework provided by psychologists and the so-called meaning-focused coping, which consists of both emotion-focused coping means, problem-focused, and then upholding a sense of meaning in life. So that's a sort of very wide framework that is needed, but then of course the practical applications may be different in various situations. So these are some of the sort of broad guidelines that I would raise up in relation to issues like this.
Thank you. Another thing common in our project group is the tool or educational what we call storyline educational approach, and it where we use story and fictional events and characters in when we are working with or teaching about sustainability issues, and even sometimes with very difficult themes. What benefits do you see with this as using fictional events and that? And do you think there may be also risks with this using fiction?
Yeah, thanks for sending this question also in advance. So I learned more personally because I haven't been using the storyline method. I'm not a trained teacher, but I've done teaching often, and the closest to this that I've been doing is participatory drama. We have a teacher and climate education scholar called Anna Lehtonen in Finland, who is also an expert in participatory drama. So we've been facilitating sessions together with her and also doing some technical academic writing. I see much promise in this storyline method when applied to eco-anxiety and ecological emotions. And I try briefly to explain why and then talk a bit about the risks also. The benefits are related especially to the fact that everything that provides a kind of third element helps in matters which are as complicated as eco-anxiety is. So it's not just the persons talking to each other, but there's a third. Of course, there's theoretical descriptions about this, but I'm not going to that either. So for example, today's children and youth are very aware of the social tensions around climate issues. For example, there may be generational disagreements, and there may be differences between the different identity groups in the classroom, for example. So when there is a constructed situation, like a storyline narrative, these kinds of dynamics can be explored by not explicitly stating one's own position. And that makes it easier. So you may explore climate denialism without adhering to it, for example. Perhaps through these kinds of juxtapositions, you might be able to understand a bit more the viewpoints of other people, or at least some factors which are related to why they are feeling and thinking what they are feeling and thinking. And regarding emotions, all kinds of embodied methods are good because the emotions live in our body minds. This is not the most intensive emotional work with the storyline method, but still, because it involves some kind of movement and symbolical objects, I see those as strengths related to this subject matter. Now about the risks. It is of course possible that quite strong emotions may emerge in some participants when doing this kind of activity. I haven't tried this method, but I see that as a possibility. It certainly happens with participatory drama, or can happen. And then one should be prepared for those kinds of situations. So, and it's not impossible, but preparation is needed. And then a possible second risk that I thought about is that it's possible that there emerges a strand of discussion in the method, which is actually very important for the children or young people, but then the facilitator doesn't realize that it's so important. And then if it's not adequately discussed, the young people may feel disappointed because there emerged something important, but that wasn't adequately discussed. But this again can be prepared for by, for example, asking anonymous feedback after the sessions and doing some follow-up discussions after it. So overall, I see many strengths in this methodology.
Yeah. Question or reflection about storyline or something else? No, they are thinking. What would you answer a parent who announces that the child is too young to discuss and address issues related to climate change as a teacher?
Another very good question. And of course, like in all communication, it's very wise to first show some validation that you have understood the message and the emotional message that the other is giving you. So starting with words which sort of validate that, yeah, that's a concern that I very well understand, or something like it, something that suits the context. And then discussing the fact that in contemporary media society, it's not just possible to shelter kids from this information. There is a growing evidence of 4 or 5 year olds discussing climate matters in kindergarten, for example. So sort of discussing this situation which has tragic elements that even if we would like to keep it secret for sometimes, it's just not possible. And then we need sensitivity to the situation in which the child is living and so on. But anyway, to answer the parents, that adults have a responsibility to face this, even though often we would not like to, but we have a responsibility to support the children in facing this.
Do you agree? And how would you advise the teacher to respond to or tackle his and her own possible climate anxiety? We have been discussing this a lot. What would you advise us to do?
First, I would emphasize self-compassion, and some people use even bodily methods for this. You may sometimes hug yourself if the situation allows, and sort of say to yourself that it's tough to be an educator in times like these. Of course, there's been very tough times in history also, thinking about the Second World War, for example. So there is historical precedents of educators having to work in very troubled circumstances. And then trying to practice self-compassion because it is difficult. And then there is all kinds of things that one can do to trying to learn skills in coping and resilience. And that doesn't happen overnight, even though there are some things which are not too difficult to learn, and then they can help greatly. For example, learning some stress reduction techniques is very, very important. Now, the Australian Psychological Society has published, I think, very good materials related to coping with climate change distress. So that's a set of materials that I often first recommend to people. Now a large group of experts is joining in producing these kinds of materials, and then trying to accept also the so-called seasons of the mind, borrowing from Per Espen Stoknes from Norway, so that there will be ups and downs. Nobody can stay enthusiastic and optimistic all the time amidst the climate crisis. But then, of course, nobody stays totally depressed either if there is effort socially to support each other. So accepting that there will be seasons and fluctuations can sometimes be relieving also. Now, this is a very large question, and we could have a 2-hour session just discussing this very, very good one question. So, but these are some of my answers to this.
That is our process has started with this. Last but not least, from my side, I hope we surely have other questions rising. When we are focusing on children's and teachers' emotions and climate anxiety and climate change overall, if you would have free hands, we have asked the same questions to other presenters. If you got free hands, resources, etc., what would the teaching or the school look and seem like that provides learning on a deeper level, and what do you think is missing today, and what could be done? Now we have free hands. Vision.
Yeah, thanks for this. This is a very fascinating question, and again, a very long answer would be possible here, but I try to keep it brief. First, I would include emotion skills very deeply in teacher training, including embodied methods, body consciousness that leads to more compassion and empathy towards oneself, but also towards others. And then there is the ecological empathy dimension, of course, also. So teacher training and emotional skills is definitely one part. Then for the school life, emotionally wise methods and group dynamics strongly as part of everyday life in schools. And there are educators who have explored these possibilities. And for example, the problems related to school bullying and the conflicts between children and youth, for example, people have found that if there is a general emphasis on emotional skills and group dynamics and non-violent communication in schools, that helps greatly. So if I would have free hands, I would put much resources on good group dynamics, and I think lots of also cognitive learning benefits very greatly if there is a sense of safety, for example, in the classroom and so on. And that would help in many ways also to encounter the difficult ecological emotions. Then various pathways to participatory action. And this is, of course, an issue that many teachers are thinking about serious, that what can they do as professional educators. And in Finland, for example, many educators then organize sort of field trips to climate demonstrations, for example. So they are not sort of officially doing the demonstration, but they are doing a field trip there. And so they are providing education into civil activism also. And a big part of our project, Hope and Action, was this developing a list of various methods for participatory action. So, and I think we can't completely avoid the political. It's technically not possible. I'm not saying that we should get overly political either, but perhaps you get what I mean here, that we do need the action dimension, and young people see the contradiction if they are not able to make a difference. And then finally, there's a very fascinating depth psychologist called Bill Plotkin. I can put the name in the chat because that's slightly tricky, who has been developing a sort of ecological centered model of human development. And that is very fascinating, regardless of what one thinks of various aspects of the methodology, but that's been totally fascinating and very important for me personally also. So I think that if I would have free hands, I would discuss with young people and others some of the methods that Plotkin is using. So here's some responses, so very nice, and again, very large question.
Yeah, they all are large, and we can discuss it ever and ever. Do you have in the group some reflection questions for Panu before we end?
I'll start by saying thank you for both coming and presenting and in your article. I have just my own personal reflection of a change or a travel, or my own travel through reading your title and being very actually negative because I didn't like the word anxiety, and then reading through the full article and seeing that hope was also one of the emotions. And so I want to just reflect and also bring that up as a very positive thing on my own personal travels through identifying emotionals, eco-anxiety or ecological emotions. So it's more of a thank you than anything.
Thanks for sharing. That's very, very valuable. And I did a book in Finnish where the title is Eco, Anxiety and Hope. So I do see them very closely connected, and anxiety has this motivation, aspiration side also, and hope has this uncertainty, anxiety dimension also, because if something is certain, where do you need hope in that context? But of course, I've been strongly emphasizing the meaningfulness dimension in definitions of hope, but that's another issue. Thanks for sharing that.
I also want to thank you, and I'm working as a headmaster at a school in Gothenburg, and I think the key areas that you are highlighting that we can work with is very hopeful, and I welcome to bring in those methods into school more than we do today, because I think we are stuck in another way of education right now that is difficult to work cross-curriculum with, and art-based, as you write here, and place-based education and contemplative pedagogy. I think it's wonderful, and I look forward to see more examples of that kind of education that we can all be inspired of, because I think we need to be inspired by practical work at schools who really do this and take this seriously. And I hope that our school can do that, and we also do right now, but more, of course. So thanks for writing this. It's very interesting.
Thank you. Very, very valuable feedback, and good to hear that you are processing this in that school in Copenhagen. And as a supplement to that article in online, there's a description of a workshop we had for teachers in this Hope and Action project, where we are using the mind map of ecological emotions exercise. So that's not exactly empirical research, but that's the closest to it that I've been doing, and that's a sort of method that I warmly recommend as a sort of first step to enable colleagues to think and name about their own emotions by using the mind map. So that's one very practical step that can be done. But thanks for the comment.
Thank you. The working group and other participants will have some homework to do before this event actually goes on in December, in 2 days in December, and much of the activities are related to the article and the work we have done these 2 days. So we are in a process right now, and the work is on. Thank you so much for attending and presenting for us, and we go on from this.
Thank you for the invitation, and all the best for your life.
Yeah, same to you. The toolkit is on the web, and I have it on my presentation, and he had it on his, and I can ask him to send his presentation if we could put it in the material. Yeah.
How do you think this was? What is your reflections now when Panu has left us? I think we have been discussing Panu's text almost those 2 days, so I felt that I didn't have the energy right now to ask him questions.
Just to say thank you for that work beforehand, because I was very comfortable with the questions you asked, but also to help him come through, because I enjoyed the. I say thanks for the pre-work, and I found myself very much moved and interested in the article, but hadn't prepared what I was going to ask, and so it was very nice to have that, and I think then he could feel he was contributing over just the article, but his own experiences. So, yes.
Or what direction, or more towards the school class, so yeah.
I also thought that your questions were very poignant for our project. I could read in your questions things that related very much to our project, and that I appreciated also. Do you have any questions over there? Back there? Or you're not back there, you're in front of us.
I was thinking of when he was talking about his dream school, and he mentioned these group dynamics. I thought that was really good, because to train the the pupils to cooperate, and I felt happy when he mentioned that.
I made a connection with that, with Ylva's character building question. Who would your character want to talk to? I don't know if was everybody part of that? Were you guys in Finland and Slovenia part of that project, that question? Because I thought that was a very poignant question also, that who does your character want to talk to or would like to talk to? And that brings it into that community, which he talked about also.
Ja. Ska vi ta lite kaffe?
We take a quarter pause now. Go and get yourself something to eat and drink, and we will be back.